Welcome to this episode. My name is Morten Albek. I am a professional photographer. I teach street photography around Europe. And before we start, please sign up both for the newsletter you find on our website if you want to read more articles about street and portrait photography and travel photography, and also sign up for the channel here so you get a notification each time there's a new video up. Today I will tell you about my latest trip to Copenhagen. Street photography done with solely the 50mm lens. Let's dig into how we use that and under which circumstances we can use it for the full potential. We can shoot with it wide open at 1.4, in this case with the Leica M9 here. I also have the Sony, and some of the lenses I have goes down to 1.4, which is wide open and with a very narrow depth of field. I also shoot on often Aperture 8 to add that depth into my pictures to get more elements in focus into the picture. And at the same time, we'll just urge you to think about how important it is to have your objects in focus, or maybe not. Henri Cartier-Bresson thought it was a little exaggerated, all that everything to have to be tack sharp. And Henri Cartier-Bresson, for the younger of you who don't know him, was the father of street photography. And he didn't care that much about everything being nailed just in focus every time. It was more about the expression, the artistic vision of what he saw. And that was much more important than the technical aspects of photography, because sometimes accidents can turn into be interesting photographs, not so much controlled in the detail by me as the photographer, but sometimes just let the camera decide. So that will come up in a future video. But first, here let's look at Copenhagen, everything done with the 50mm lens. So what's the big difference shooting wide open or narrow aperture down to like 8 so you get a bigger depth of field? Well, the big difference is that when you have it wide open, you can blur things out around your subject, get that a little bit more maybe dreamy look, and you can also exclude objects that can be disturbing in the background and not part of the overall composition. They are, but they are more subtle in the sense that they are on focus, they are out of the focus field where you have nailed the focus, and this way it gives a different look. If we set the camera at aperture 5.6 or 8, you will have a wider depth of field. So you can use that zone focus technique where you have things in focus from a certain distance out to infinity, or the other way around. And let's talk a little bit about zone focus, because when I shoot wide open, I have to nail focus. I have to find somewhere where people, if they are walking, passing by, then I find an object, nail my focus on that point, and when people then pass that point, then I click my shutter button and hopefully they are nailed in that position, because it can be really challenging with manual focus to follow focus. There it's better to use a camera with autofocus that can follow them, but you also have the chance that the autofocus grabs something just nearby, something passing in front of the subject you actually want to be in focus. So both cameras and both methods have their challenges, and to be honest, you don't always nail it. It is not possible. You will have failures, you will have missed shots, you'll have misaligned it. Maybe your composition is not alright because you were grabbing something that happened just in front of you. I set my aperture, and I have on my phone, I have an app if I need assistance to know exactly how far away from my camera and onto infinity, if I want that. How far is the focus area? How wide an area will I have things in focus? So I use that app, or I use the measure on top of the Leica camera here, where I have an indicator that shows me when I set my aperture at 8, then in between those small lines that I show you here and the aperture setting on my lens. In between those lines, I will have focus, and I can read that. Use this app, and I'm not advertising for anything here, just an app I found valuable, and it costs like 2 or 3 euros or something like that, less. So it's very cheap, and it's an easy calculator if you need it when you're in the street and say, okay, I want to shoot at 8 and I want to put my focus here. How far away will I have focus, and how close on will I have focus with that lens and with that sensor type I'm using. Here it's full frame in both cameras. So I put that into the little app here, and it tells me where my focus is. So you can play around with that if you need that. So that's how zone focus works. You can preset your focus and have an idea where your focus will be. So when I walk around using my 50mm, I think 50mm, I move around with that lens and know I have to step a little forward, go a little backwards to make my framing. And because I use the 50mm lens most of the time, I actually know up front how far away I have to walk or how close I have to move in to my subjects or the scenery I want to frame to get it. So I'm zooming with my feet back and forward instead of having the lens doing that, which will also change the perspective. So the perspective have a certain character on a lens like the 50mm compared to like a 28mm lens. That makes a completely different picture, and we can look into that in a later video. But here it is about the 50mm. So when I walk in Copenhagen, I'm not having a certain subject I want to do. I do not go for anything particular. I look at the light, I look at interesting people, I look at interesting sceneries, whatever comes to my mind. And this means having this approach, it can be one thing one day and it can be something completely different another day, depending on my mood and my feelings that day, what I see, and of course, what accidentally happens when I'm there. One of the things I looked for that day was the metro station, the underground trains, because they were newly built, and in Copenhagen there's a really well done rail system underneath the ground. But I was not interested in what happened in the train. I was much more interested in the surroundings, the metro stations, because they are built modern. They have nice light, both natural light and artificial light, and they made that kind of scenery that was special. And when you begin to photograph something, it changes the view on things. It is not like, okay, here's a picture of a train station and that's it. No, when you use the light, the lines, the architecture, letting people pass through, you can create another story that has nothing to do actually with the metro station itself. It is just a story about the environment, the people walking around there. It can almost be sci-fi like, or however you perceive it. So it's more a way of expressing something that is not necessarily about a train station, but about life in general and how we behave in the public. People look differently, and grabbing them in a split of a second can change what you see. So sometimes I find a scenery, I make my framing, I find that interesting light, and then I simply wait there for things to happen inside my frame. And it can be different things, it can be dull. So I shoot something and say, okay, that was not interesting. And suddenly, especially when I come home, I see something that I didn't see when I took the picture. It happens afterwards. You do not necessarily see it when it happens, but afterwards you experience the way people were moving, how they were placed inside the frame. All of these things together suddenly makes a different story than the one I saw when I was there. And at other times I know when I take the picture, this is how it is going to be perceived by me, maybe not by you, depend on how you approach things and how you look at life and how you generally appreciate pictures and what's in there, because some people like to see portraits, some people like to watch interesting people, other people look more on the architecture, the light, the lines, all of that, the balance in the picture, and we all have our different views on that. So there's no formula for what is right and what is wrong. Everything is right, with one exception that I noticed today on a social media. A person, I will not mention this person as a photographer, because this person asked, is there an app that can remove people from my picture? And my answer is, there probably is, and you can probably do it, but then you're not a photographer. Photography is about what we see through the lens and the viewfinder and capture with that lens, not what we begin to remove afterwards, because then it's not what we saw anymore, then it is just artificial, then it is AI, it is all of that I hate about people beginning to remove or add objects into a picture and make it artificial. It has nothing to do with photography, maybe it's something else, but keep it out of photography, please. So I like to try to capture what I can. Maybe I alter a little on the horizon, maybe I will do less, because it depends on my mood and what I see. Some people think that street photography should be exactly as you framed it in the camera, but my opinion is you can correct the framing afterwards if you need it, but if you remove anything inside that chosen frame, then we are making a deception, then we are cheating, then we are lying for people to believe that you saw this thing in reality and then you didn't. And I know it is also art. We also change things when we frame and wait for the moment, but this is how photography originally was born, and this is how it should stay, I think. So Henri Cartier-Bresson was talking about the imperfectness in the pictures. It was much more important for him what was happening in the pictures, not if it was tack sharp, if it was framed absolutely correctly, if it was a little messy. It was all about what is going on inside the frame, what is the story he could present with his pictures. Therefore, do not alter a lot on your pictures. You can do whatever you want, but do not begin to remove anything inside the frame. Accept it as it is. And here is a picture where I was looking for colors and interesting things, and I was standing in front of a big store, and it has that colored banner on top of it, and I noticed that little girl with her mom ready to pass the street, and she had exactly the same colors on her clothes that on the framing on top. And yes, this picture is imperfect because I had to shoot it and I had set the camera wide open for another subject I photographed just a second before. Then I noticed this and have to use the setting as I had it because I wanted to snap this picture and it is not completely in focus. So I rely on good old Henri Cartier-Bresson and accept that the little girl and her mother is not perfectly in focus. The lady just beside them are, but so it is. It is still an interesting picture. Something happens there that is very interesting. And usually I shoot fully manual on most things, but I was inspired, and this is all about inspiration all the time when you're doing photography. I was inspired to try to set my camera on automatic, in this case with a Leica M9 shutter speed. With the Sony I can put it on automatic ISO and then control my aperture, and I can control my shutter speed there, but mostly I like to control my aperture, so I'm sure if I'm going for the wide depth of field or the very narrow depth of field. So with a wide opening at 1.4 I have very little depth of focus or depth of field that is in focus, and with a higher aperture narrowing down the light that comes in, then it also widens up the sharpness of the rear coming back to the depth of field and how you can preset that so you don't have to focus all the time, but know in this area I can work where everything is focused. It just demands that you're more deliberate about how things are placed inside the frame. So maybe I will let my camera decide something for me so I can concentrate on framing and then forget about some of the technical aspect with that failure in mind, that it might happen that something will not be lit correctly, precisely as I wanted it, but when I'm shooting manually I also miss something in between because you have to act fast. The greatness of controlling manual is that especially when you're shooting up against something that is really difficult lighted and not the average light, then it can trigger the camera to be completely wrong, and there I want to be in control with my manual settings. And all of this is something I teach and try to inspire at my workshops, and please note I have recently dumped my prices because of the situation we have. You all know that. So I have dumped my prices so you can get them really cheap at the moment. I'm going to Rome in the end of May. I'm going to Copenhagen in the end of June. And there is a Paris coming up. Paris is coming up in September. So look into that. Get in the streets, walk with me, and I'll try to teach you all of the things I'm doing with photography so you can get inspired to do more street photography, portrait or travel photography on a higher level. So I hope I can inspire you with that. And it doesn't matter if it is Leica, Sony, Nikon, Canon, Ricoh, whatever it is. Bring the camera you have, because the basics are whatever lenses you have. Photography is the same thing. It is just different mechanics we use for them depending on what we like. So jump in, check that out on the website, and hope you will also watch my next video, visit my website and read more about photography. Thank you for watching.